call this meeting of the James City Service Authority Board of Directors regular meeting to order. Mr. Powell, if you could call the roll.
Mr. McGlennon. Here. Mr. Hipple. Here. Mr. Eisenhower. Here. Ms. Larson.
Here. I need a motion to allow Ms. Sadler to participate remotely due to an illness that prevents her from attending the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Powell, if you could call the roll.
Mr. McGlennon. Aye. Mr. Hipple. Mr. Eisenhower. Aye. Ms. Larson.
Aye. Ms. Sadler, do you designate the vice chair as the presiding officer for today's meeting?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing we have no presentations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any public comment?
No, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. Consent calendar 1, minutes adoption.
Move the adoption of the consent calendar.
Thanks. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. With that, moves to public hearings, regulations governing utility service update, public hearing and adoption. Mr. Powell.
Thank you. At your meeting last month, we introduced this topic, and this afternoon is the public hearing for the James City Service Authority regulations governing utility service update. The regulations have not been comprehensively revised in about 30 years. The proposed regulations before you tonight are the result of a multi-year effort on the part of JCSA staff and the county attorney's office to update them. The goals of the update were to simplify the regulations, make them easier to understand, reflect current laws, and reflect current best practices. In addition to the clean copy of the proposed regulations and the strike-through copy of the regulations that you have in your packet, you also have a 2-page summary of the changes to the regulations. And I'm not going to go through all of those proposed changes in the presentation, but I did just want to highlight a couple of the significant changes. First is the requirement to connect. Under the proposed regulations, parcels with any portion within 55 feet of JCSA infrastructure accessible through an existing right-of-way would be required to connect. Under the current regulations, the requirement is 300 feet for residences that are not in a subdivision and 1,000 feet for commercial. The second major change that I wanted to mention was related to master meters. Under the proposed regulations, master meters will not be allowed in multifamily developments where units are individually owned, such as townhomes and condominiums. They will only be allowed where the development is under one single ownership. Third, there are a number of programs that were part of the current regulations that really don't need to be. Programs like our fats, oil, and grease, cross-connection, backflow control, grinder pump policies, those sorts of things. The regulations stipulate that those are all separate policies that are administered by the general manager. So in an effort to simplify the regulations, we've taken those programs out of the regulations that don't need to be part of the regulations. And then fourth, there are some, I would characterize them as modest, but there are some fee changes as part of the regulation update, things like plan review, tampering, things along those lines where these fees have not been updated in many, many years. And so we propose some modest fee increases in those types of places. So that really concludes my prepared remarks. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have. The resolution before you tonight, if you approve it, stipulates that the revised regulations go into effect tomorrow. We're prepared to implement them tomorrow, but if you wanted to pick a different implementation date, or if you feel like you need more time to review, that's okay as well. But our recommendation is to adopt the proposed regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Are there any questions for Mr. Powell?
I don't have any questions. I just want to compliment Ms. Powell and the staff for the Herculean effort here. I mean, this is never an easy thing to do, to bring policies and regulations up to date and to centralize them all in one location and make it much clearer for citizens to be able to understand what's going on and for staff to know exactly how they should go about implementing our policies. So thank you very much for all that effort, and congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments, and I'm not going to try to name everybody who contributed because I'm sure I would forget somebody, but there were a lot of staff who put a lot of time into this. This was tedious work, and again, I also want to recognize the county attorney's office who were a tremendous help in this process.
Question. Flag lots, connections, even though the flag lot is touching the right-of-ways for the service authority and can connect, if they're because some of our rural areas, they may be back 1,000, 1,500 feet back further. They could do water by well, but how does the new stipulation take care of that situation?
And we've experienced that some in the past where the house is so far back from the infrastructure that it's really difficult for us to provide the pressure and to really provide the service. So what we have done in the updated regulations is if you're 600 feet from the actual infrastructure, you can apply to the general manager for a waiver.
Okay.
Which I would be inclined to approve, because again, part of the reason we picked that number is that once you get a certain distance from the infrastructure, it's hard for us to provide the service at the pressure that would be desirable.
Thank you.
Bryce Sauer, you have any questions? Ms. Sadler, any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you. Ms. Powell, thank you also for all the hard work that you and everyone on your team has done to provide this, and the attorney's office as well. So thank you, everyone.
With that, I'll open the public hearing. Do we have any comments this evening
No,
on
ma'am.
this matter? Okay. With that, I will close the public hearing, and I will look to the board for discussion and or a motion.
The adoption of the.
Thank you. Mr. Powell, will you please call the roll?
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel? Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye. That moves us to board considerations, a contract award, annual easement clearing services. Mr. Powell?
James City Service Authority is responsible for maintaining about 80 miles of pipelines within easements that are not in the VDOT right-of-way. This clearing is necessary for JCSA to maintain access to our infrastructure, and it's also required under our management operations and maintenance program that's part of the consent order, where we have to clear wastewater easements every 5 years. We issued a request for proposal. A committee reviewed 5 proposals, and the resolution before you tonight approves the authorization of awards to 2 companies, Nature Chem and Arbor Pro. And since JCSA's budget includes over $100,000 for this activity, the award of this contract requires board approval.
Questions? Your motion.
I just had one question, and that when we start doing the actual work on this, that's when we start getting phone calls from people who say, "What are they out doing, cutting my trees back here?" Well, you got an easement out there. Do you have a plan already set up of communities that are going to be affected and how we can keep people appraised of that? Because I think you did a real good job of that last time. It's really important to get ahead of that, I think.
Yes, we do. We notify property owners if we're going to be working in adjacent to their property, and that, I think for the most part, that has been working well. We're continuing along with that practice.
Your motion.
Resolution.
Thank you. Mr. Powell?
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye. With that, we are going to go into closed session. So after the motion has been passed, we will have to clear the room for the duration of this discussion. Closed session for discussion or consideration of the investment of public funds related to a water supply agreement with Newport News, where competition or bargaining is involved, where it is made initially that the financial interests of the JCSA would be adversely affected pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A6 of the Code of Virginia, and consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pertaining to a water supply agreement with Newport News, pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A8 of the Code of Virginia. Is there a motion to go in this closed
So
session?
moved.
Thank you. Mr. Powell?
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower? Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye. Motion to certify the closed session.
Move to certify that we only spoke about those items we indicated we would speak about in the closed session.
Thank you.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower? Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye. With that brings us to board requests and directives. Ms. Sadler?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. And with that, the general manager's update.
I would just point to the dashboard. We didn't sell as much water this month. It's been very wet. Delinquencies, I'm still not at a point where I'm too concerned, but they are trending up. So it's something we need to keep an eye on.
Dashboard looks great, by the way. It just really is very helpful to get all that information.
That will bring us to our adjournment. We will adjourn until 4 p.m. on November 24th, 2020 for our regular meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will call to order this meeting of the James City County Board of Supervisors for a purpose for work session. And Mr. Stevens, if you would call the roll, please.
Mr. McGlennon?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
Mr. Hippel?
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Okay, I need a motion to allow Ms. Sadler to participate remotely due to an ongoing medical condition.
So moved.
Okay. Ruth, Mr. Stevens, call the roll.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel? Mr. Eisenhower? Aye. Very good, Mr. carries.
Okay, and Sue, you can still hear us, right?
I can hear you better now, thank you.
Okay, good. I'll try to stay up close to the mic for you.
Thank you.
Alrighty, we are getting arrival of everyone. Okay. I believe, Mr. Kraft, my script calls for me to turn it over to you to call the Planning Commission to order. So if you want to come to the podium and do that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll call the Planning Commission Working Group meeting for October 27th, 2020 to order. Mr. Holt, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rose, can you hear us? Mr. Rose? Okay. All right, we'll come back to him. Ms. Leverins.
Here.
Ms. Leverins is an at-large member and is this year's vice chair to the Planning Commission. Mr. Polster? Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District. Mr. Haldeman? Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. O'Connor?
Present.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member, and Mr. Kropp?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District and is this year's chair to the Planning Commission. We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holt, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, see, we will start a briefing on the Engage 2045 Comprehensive Plan Update Process. Ms. Ellen Cook will introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. PowerPoint here. Today marks our fourth check-in with the Board of Supervisors during the Engage 2045 process. With me today are Vlad Gavrilovich with EPRPC and Leanne King with Clarion Associates. In addition, Ms. Ginny Wertman is with us today as a member of the Planning Commission Working Group and the acting chair of the Community Participation Team. Since our last check-in in May, staff, the consultants, the CPT, and the PCWG have completed significant phases of work associated with the Comprehensive Plan Update process. We would first like to summarize the input from the second round of public engagement, which includes bringing you up to speed on the scenario planning process and results and the subsequent feedback received from the public on this information. Next, we would like to go through the 2 frameworks that have been developed based on all of the public input received during this update so far, those being the plan framework and the preferred scenario framework. These are important to highlight as they will influence the topics we explore and the revisions that will be considered in the coming months. Next slide, please. Our objectives for this meeting are not only to bring you up to speed, but also to answer your questions on the summary of Round 2 public engagement and to get your input and affirmation on the 2 framework documents. As you consider these items today, Ms. Mortman will share information about the work of the CPT, and Ms. Leverins and Mr. Kropp will share information about the PCWG's discussion and planned approaches. Next slide, please. Over the next few slides, Leanne will start the discussion of the Round 2 public engagement results, followed by Vlad discussing the preferred scenario portion of the Round 2 engagement, and then remarks from Ms. Wortman. In the interest of time, we are purposely just touching upon highlights. Full information was included in today's packet, and we would be happy to go back to any point or slide where you would desire more information or discussion. With that, I will hand it over to
Ellen. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. Happy to be here today to present to you the inputs that we received through Round 2. Paul, if you want to go to the next slide. Just a reminder that this is a 5-phase process in terms of the actual project phases, and there are 4 critical community engagement phases. So what we're presenting today is really the exploring and testing phase 2 that you see there, and we have 3 ahead of us that we'll be working on in coming months. Next slide. When we talk about public engagement as part of this process, we talk of it as a cumulative effort that really builds off of some foundations. The key one being the actual 2035 adopted comprehensive plan, your existing comprehensive plan, the citizen survey, the Round 1 summit inputs that were collected the winter of last year, and then the Round 2 inputs, testing both the currently adopted goals in your comprehensive plan and different scenarios about those. And again, we've got 2 more rounds of engagement that will be occurring in future months. Next. So our baseline for really understanding that community guidance, again, this is cumulative, we're building as we move through, is really that 2019 citizen survey, and particularly the gaps that were identified between important issues that community members raised as part of that survey and their satisfaction with those different issues. So that really kind of set the stage in terms of our understanding of what people were really concerned about and wanted to achieve in this planning effort. Next slide. From that, we conducted the Summit on the Future last November and collected online inputs. And through that, we identified 5 public input priorities. The community participation team spent a lot of time taking a close look at all of the inputs and identified the 5 that you see on the screen here. And we're just going to briefly touch on each of these. If you want to go to the next slide. The first one here is nature. So the natural environment is a highly valued component of James City County. And a high proportion of residents that were reached as part of this public engagement Round 1 in value protecting nature from the impacts of growth and development in the future. So that's one of the fundamental priorities of this planning effort. Next slide is community character. So in addition to the natural environment, the county's rural aspects of its community character are also highly valued. And to the extent any new development occurs, it should be directed within the planning primary services area and away from rural lands. Affordable housing was also a priority identified. Supporting the development of affordable housing is an important issue to the community, that it be balanced and provide opportunities for all income levels and also preserve the county's unique community character. Economic development is our 4th public input priority, focusing on recruitment of businesses with higher paying jobs. And identifying that while tourism is a major economic driver, there's an opportunity to have a balance with other employment and industries. And then the final public input priority, last but not least, quality of life. There are additional quality of life amenities that residents raise through the planning effort that they're interested in be part of this comprehensive planning process. So I'm going to walk you through some of the specifics about our Round 2 Exploring Our Future Alternatives Assembly. So we had hosted a webinar actually in this room on August 10th and followed that with two online questionnaires, one that focused on the current goals in the existing comprehensive plan and one that focused on some alternative land use scenarios, and we'll give you an overview of those here in just a moment. So that was available through live broadcast in different ways, and we got input through email, phone, online surveys, and paper surveys. So it was a pretty robust way to kind of capture it, particularly during the pandemic. Next slide. So in terms of an overview of what we learned on the goals questionnaire, and I'll have a segment of this presentation later on that will provide a little bit more detail on the goals questionnaire results. But the key items here is that when we asked folks if they wanted to maintain the existing goals in the currently adopted comprehensive plan, change those, or do something else, a majority of respondents across all of the 9 goals said that they would like to maintain the goal. And you can see that 55 to 83%, that's the range of kind of support for maintaining the goal across those 9 comprehensive plan goals. While there were a minority of responses, there are some really good open-ended comments that were provided from public engagement participants about possibly refining those goals. And so that's something that we're looking at as part of this process, and the community participation team spend a lot of time looking at those and theming those to identify some good ideas that were generated through that. And the last point I wanted to make here was that education is not a comprehensive plan chapter, but we don't want to forget about it. We know that it is a really critical, important, and valued asset in this community, and so that's just something that we want to kind of think about as we work towards creating the new. With that, I'm going to add your.
Thank you, Leanne. Good afternoon, members of the Board Planning Commission. I want to brief you on scenario planning effort that was part of this whole project. Next slide, please. Scenario planning effort, as we've shared with you before, go ahead and do the next slide. Thank you. Was built on a foundation of citizen input. Both the November summit and the citizen survey from 2019 helped us develop the scenarios that were part of this effort. The 2 scenarios were a trend line, basically a continuation of present trends in the county, and an alternative vision based on public input. These were run through 3 computer models: land use, transportation, and economic and fiscal, and facilities. And the results of these were shared with the Planning Commission Working Group and then shared with the public at the Assembly in August, and were turned into a questionnaire that citizens responded to. Next slide. The results of the testing were shared with the Planning Commission Working Group. You can see some images here of the various outputs of the computer models, as well as the maps, the land use maps and patterns that were shared. Next slide. And the conclusions from this modeling, this is just from the planning team, this is not citizen input, but some of the conclusions were scenario B, or the alternative, had more results that conformed to the public input that we received for their preferred vision or direction for the county, not surprisingly, since that's what it was built on. Scenario A had a higher value of revenues to costs in the time frame of the scenario, although both scenarios had general positive fiscal impact on the county. The growth in scenario B was geared more towards higher density housing and mixed use development than scenario A, again consistent with what we heard. In scenario B, in the testing, had generally better environmental protection, feasibility for affordable housing, and less traffic impacts than A. And both scenarios had relatively equal access to existing facilities and amenities, parks, fire stations, schools. However, the more compact growth pattern of B would allow future facilities to be located more efficiently closer to employment and population centers. Next slide. So the results were shared with the public in these 3 ways: through maps, images, and numbers, and were turned into this online questionnaire that allowed them to rate their preferences on the scenarios. Next slide. And they were asked to rate them on a 5-star rating scheme, from 1 star, which is furthest from your vision for the future of the county, to 5-star closest to the vision. And they had this tell us why button that allowed them to share open-ended comments. It was open for 3 weeks. We received 134 completed questionnaires, 292 open-ended comments. Even though this was not as good as the last round, we were pretty pleased with these because it was a very robust survey, very in-depth. The fact that many people took that long to complete it, and had very high quality comments we were very pleased with. Next slide. And this is the results. So on the mapping questions, you can see scenario A on the left and B on the right. Scenario A achieved the highest number of 1-star votes, which was farthest from their vision of the county, and B, the alternative, the highest number of 5-star votes. So a clear preference for B over A. Next slide. On the images, similar pattern. Now these were divided according to the 5 public input themes: affordable housing, community character, etc. But you can see 1 stars for A, 5-star responses for B, so a clear preference for B. Next slide. And finally, on the numbers, slightly less of a strong preference, but still a pretty clear preference for scenario B with the 5-star votes. Next slide. In the open-ended comments, people put a lot of thought into these. These are just a summary of them. The green dots are positive comments, the orange dots are negative comments. Next slide. But we summarized overall impressions on the public comments. So the comments showed a very significant preference for scenario B over A. And these really suggest a land use policy direction that looks more like the land use pattern in B. Keeping in mind, though, that the purpose of these scenarios was to test these broad conceptual land use patterns over the whole county. And the Planning Commission Working Group will need to do a more site-specific evaluation in the coming weeks to develop the future land use map. It's also notable that there was a small but strongly felt opposing opinion that preferred current trends. Several comments suggested that there could be some hybrid approach where desirable elements of each scenario could be combined. And a number of people suggested that the county needed to limit population and development regardless of the scenario. Next slide. So just to share with you overall takeaways from the second round of engagement, both the goals questionnaire and the scenarios questionnaire, we found a remarkable amount of consistency with what we were hearing from the survey, from the round 1 results. You'll hear a lot of the same themes because that is really what the citizens were saying consistently in these. And the cumulative results show that a different approach is needed to manage growth and change in the county and support the implementation of these public input priorities. There was a clear support for more compact growth that protects the natural and rural lands, upholds the county's unique community character, as depicted at least conceptually in scenario B in the survey. There was also strong support for more biking and walking facilities, and the housing and transportation goals from the goal survey suggested that these areas might need some modification as well. Next slide. So how will all these results be used? Collectively, the scenario results, the citizen survey, there were 2 rounds of engagement as managed and guided by the CPT, all go into defining the refined goals and policies framework that the Planning Commission Working Group is developing right now. And then all of these go in to build the future land use map, and then finally get translated into the implementation and new plan framework in the coming months. And a leave behind model will be based on that future land use map. So that's a summary of scenario planning. At this point, I want to turn it over to Ms. Wertman to share the CPT thoughts, and then back to you, Mr. Chair, for discussion and questions.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Wertman. I am the co-chair of the community participation team. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some background on our work during this second round of engagement. In preparing for the round 2, the CPT worked closely with the planning team to ensure that the 2 instruments that we use to gather public input were understandable, user-friendly, and would elicit the responses that would achieve the desired objective. That objective was to use the scenario and goals surveys to deepen our understanding of the gap areas identified in the 2019 citizen survey, as well as the priorities expressed by citizens in the first round of engagement. Given the complexity of the modeling effort and the confines of the software that was used for the surveys, this was a challenging task that we spent a considerable amount of time on. As Vlad said, we included many opportunities for people to provide explanatory, open-ended comments in both survey instruments, the scenario instrument as well as the goals instrument. And that, I'm happy to report, there were many respondents that took a considerable advantage of that opportunity. And we really got a lot out of those comments. They helped to deepen and enrich our understanding of people's survey choices and how they felt about the goals that you'll hear about later. Turning to the outreach role of the CPT, the pandemic forced us to abandon the in-person events that were a hallmark of the first round of engagement, including the first assembly that we did, which, as you will remember, we had places all over the county. To help overcome this loss, we expanded the use of social and digital media. We did more advertising on WADA buses, and we added the opportunity for live Q&A during the virtual assembly. In addition to facilitate participation by residents who are restricted in their ability to engage electronically, the team arranged for access to electronic surveys using the library bookmobile, and we made paper copies available on request through the Planning Division. Despite these efforts, citizen participation declined significantly. We had about 440 people in the first round of engagement and about 135 in the second round. The positive look at that is that the demographic profile of the people who did respond is largely representative of the county, and a majority of participants in this round said that this was their first involvement in a county planning process. So we're interpreting that to mean that our outreach efforts did work. While not as numerous as we hoped, the responses to the surveys affirmed the priorities expressed in prior rounds, and as Let said, paint a picture of a future that varies considerably from the path we've been on. Looking forward, we will continue to search for creative ways to engage citizens in the important decision-making phases of the comp plan process that are lying ahead, but it will be challenging to increase participation with the ongoing pandemic and the growing fatigue with virtual events. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Wortman. Okay. All right. At this point, we are going to open it up for any comments, questions, or discussion. I'll look to the board members, and then we'll look to the Planning Commission members as well to start out.
I found the presentation very useful and helpful. Obviously, pretty clear signal being sent by the citizens about what they want and don't want. I'm looking forward to the coming evaluations of it. I think one of the things that I would come away from this presentation with is simply the idea that, as I understand it, the scenarios that you were looking at really assume the same level of population growth and the like under scenario A or B. And so I guess one question would be, will there be opportunities as we move along to see scenarios that attempt to bend the curve in response to public opinion that suggests that we would rather see an effort to better manage the rate of population growth? I don't know if that's something that would be incorporated in the next round, or as you're further refining this, whether that's even part of the process here.
Yeah, Mr. McLennan, the scenarios, you're right, purposely held population employment constant with the idea that this was a 25-year forecast, but it could happen in 35 years, it could happen in 15, 20 years, depending on market factors. So it's just a standard increment of growth to compare and get apples to apples comparisons. But many of the responses we we heard addressed things like the growth rate, and that certainly can be translated into policies and implementation. Modeling that is not necessarily part of the scope, and I think it would be kind of a increment of where we've been already. You know, it's like we went 25 years. If you take half of that, the results might be half of that. But I certainly think that it can be translated into policies and actions and things like that to actually affect the growth rate.
I think I'll hold till I hear from the Planning Commission. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got a few things. By reading it and listening, it sounds like from scenario planning that we would almost be looking at more development within the PSA is what we're hearing. And that would almost, it would be one community but two within one. The PSA area would be a tighter knit and closer development. So we may have to change some of our thought process on what we're doing now within the PSA. And then that would relieve some of the rural lands and leave the rural character and change some of the things we may be doing in the rural section of the county. And so it'd almost be that it would be an area that during the week you would live within a tighter net area to get to more businesses and facilities and that sort of thing, and maybe then go out into the country, but still within James City County, to buy produce and that sort of thing, ride horses, walk, bike, travel, you know, and do that kind of at a break during the week when you couldn't maybe have a vacation during a pandemic. So that may then look at our PSA, you know, our PSA files water and sewer and that sort of thing, and that's what limits us. It may then look at, is our PSA in the right place? Would it be better to change the PSA and pull some back this way and add some out that way, still keeping the same size, but, you know, allowing more development closer to what we have already infrastructure-wise and travel-wise and that sort of thing, and business-wise, and then some of the further out areas, maybe that's not PSA, maybe that's your rural lands, and that sort of thing is what I think I'm reading and hearing is starting to form in this. And then another thing that, and I've talked about, everybody knows that one of my favorite roads is Ford Road, and you know, there's certain areas in the county, certain different roads that may be something that we need to look at as far as a protection zone within a certain area in order so that never changes what it feels and looks like now. People drive out there for a feeling, for a look. They may not ever ride a horse, but they may want to ride out there and take pictures of the sunset with the horses in the background and enjoy it, where others are horseback riding and trail bike riding and that sort of thing. And so, you know, we may have to look at some of those areas that are unique and special, where our citizens from hundreds of years ago had farms and kept them up, and now their family has it and their family has it, and they're continuing that, or someone's bought into a farm and they're continuing that same lifestyle. And so we may want to look at that, and you know, because once we start losing a piece or two on that road's gone. And what happens is you lose a component or a large piece, and you get development in certain areas, and then the people that are always protected and always watch that area in there, they decide I'm leaving, or the next generation goes, it's getting too crowded, I'm moving out. And you know, so trying to keep that, you know, the tight area within the PSA where everybody can enjoy the things that they like to do, and then but then be able to go out into the country, and we've saved both. You know, we've allowed some growth, but we've also saved the rural character. My 2 cents.
Sue, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yes, if I could, and forgive me if this was covered in the presentation. Audio can be a little challenging these days. With the pandemic, does that change the timeline of the process that we're going through? Or is there going to be any time added on to make up for any of the perhaps loss of public meetings, or how does that factor in?
Good evening. I'll help with that question. The overall timeline has adjusted some. We originally anticipated having our public input session for round 2 approximately a month earlier. And we have also, in combination with the pandemic, but also sort of the complicated nature of this material, delayed our 3rd round from a December start to a January start. And so we are making strides elsewhere to keep this still looking like a late summer consideration item with the Board of Supervisors. But we have approximately 2 months delay thus far in our process.
Thank you. If I might follow up with that, please. Citizens who have not yet participated in the process for whatever reason. So with this delay, this will actually give more people a chance to participate, perhaps?
Yes, we were thinking in particular with the one that we were anticipating in December, that having an early January start would get us past the holidays. And also, we are aiming to stretch out our public input from a 3-week to 4-week period to a 7-week period. That's something the CPT is considering. So we are thinking about ways to allow people additional time and additional opportunities to participate, and timed correctly to have a little bit more of the focus be on other things than the holidays.
So if I might just have one more question, please, Tammy. Thank you so much for your help. So anybody that's new coming into the process, will they at all feel a little behind the 8 ball, so to speak, because they've not participated in the earlier part, and then all of these calculations have already been laid into place? Will they truly feel like that their voice is going to matter since all of this other groundwork has been laid? I know it will, but I just want to encourage citizens who have not yet participated to know that your voice does matter. So I would just like for you to, if you could clear that up for us.
Oh, certainly, and I'll invite Leanne and Vlad to join in if I miss anything. But the CPT takes as one of its missions to educate citizens as part of this, and we look at that with each round of public input. We try and make it so that they're standalone in that sense that we're still explaining what the comprehensive plan is, and we are focused on a different area. So it is building, but each round is standalone, and we try to give a lot of explanation so that a new participant can feel like they can participate in the process completely.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your help.
I'd open it up to questions from any of the, or comments from any of the Planning Commission members. Shy. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one other thing. Reflecting on Mr. Hippel's comments earlier, which I think were very well taken about this notion of the inside the PSA being likely to experience more development and the outside part really being a kind of place where people will know that there's preservation of agricultural lands and forestal lands and so forth. I do think that there's also, though, an expectation that within the PSA that we are going to take care to provide or encourage the development or protection of natural area. That it's not just that you want to get in your car on the weekend and drive to Forge Road, but that you also want to feel that in your neighborhood you are in close proximity to a place where you can walk and enjoy some natural settings and not simply have to deal with traffic congestion and we have a lot of areas within the PSA, I think, that are likely to be ripe for redevelopment, and that redevelopment could include efforts to restore natural features as opposed to just, sort of replacing a strip shopping mall with a kind of multi-use retail shopping area. Maybe you do that, but you also, at the same time, incorporate a portion of that land in ways that reflect the kind of values of restoration of trees and parkland, and so forth.
Chair, may I add to that?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. McGlenn's point was driven home in the Preserve Change Map. In the November summit, we asked citizens to put green dots on areas they want to preserve, red on areas they want to change. And it was clear from that either people didn't know where the PSA line was, or they had clear priorities of what they wanted to preserve in and around their neighborhoods, because the preserve dots were all over the map, including in the PSA, and they knew what features they wanted to preserve, to Mr. McGlennon's point.
Very good.
So, thanks. So here's often, I think, the struggle when you get participation, which you desperately, this is the citizen county, so you want to, but then not everything that everyone's asked for is going to come to fruition. And so, what is I don't know the best way to explain that, or to, do you think people understand that, first of all, as they're going through this process? And then I would also say that, and just also ask or make a note of that there are some comments that different members of the Planning Commission Working Group have made on some changes that they would like to see throughout the comp plan as well. So we do have that input from them. But, what's the best way to communicate that you may not get everything that you want out of this comp plan? And so, in your past experience, is it just that people are happy with that something may have been listened to, or something that they may have, a little bit of what they suggested has come into play?
I can jump in. I'm actually just remembering Mr. Hipple made a comment on when we were working on the strategic plan that you said if there's something for everyone in this plan. It may not be that you agree with everything that's in here, but it's a good consensus-based plan. And I think that's one of the things we want to kind of strive for. You're absolutely correct. We're never going to satisfy 100% of people 100%. But the idea is that we're trying to build this cumulative input, so we're making sure we're listening to everyone and trying to find, are there inconsistencies, and let's learn a little bit more about those if they are there. For the most part, we're not really seeing a lot of that. Now, this next round of engagement, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on specific policy direction and implementation ideas, so there may be a little bit more deviation in response. We'll see how it plays out. I think just being open and transparent about what we're learning and what people are saying is the most critical first piece, and then having good discussions and dialogue about the hard choices that have to be made. I guess I would say this, probably more so than most comprehensive planning process, has been very consistent in terms of what people want to achieve. So I'm not anticipating that it's going to be a hard sell at the end necessarily, because I think there's just been so much comment and what people are interested in.
And I think too, with his comment on the, redeveloping certain areas, what we may have to look at as we're redeveloping those areas, of course, we as the county won't be doing it, but it'll be done by the private sector. So we've also got to look in to if we're going to require so much green in a certain area, which I agree, maybe we go up higher, or the density is a little more packed, so that, because they've got to be able to get X out of it, but we want to make sure that X doesn't cover the whole piece. And so, trying to get that, maybe we have to go up a little higher or pack them a little bit tighter in order to have that green space and that sort of thing. And I think when we put certain things in place and we have a guideline of this is the development that we're looking for in this area, I think then the developers will come in to fit in within that. Okay, I can make that work as far as this much green space, this many units gets me this, so I can, so we got to kind of balance that as well to, to get that harmony with everybody, the citizens that want to live there, the developer who develops it, and the county as well, so we can all kind of hit that in almost like a three-legged stool. If we lose one leg, stool doesn't stand up.
I think also it's important to remember that there's a lot of things that are already in play that we can't change. Right. And so we have to look at what we can, if that's a decision that we decide to make. So, I don't want people to expect that there's going to be all of a sudden this big change when it'll be a process. So.
Okay, I believe we are to the point where we can start and pass the presentation over back to Ms. King. Who's next? The vision, goals, and policy considerations.
Thank you for this discussion. As our next item, Leanne will discuss the plan framework, which includes 3 pieces: the vision, goals, and initial policy considerations for the 9 chapters. At the end of her presentation, Ms. Leverns will cover the PCWG's discussion and planned approach for these 3 items. We will then seek the board's input and direction. Thank you.
Get to the next slide, Paul. So again, we're starting to move into phase 3, deciding and affirming, and really kind of thinking about the overall policy direction that we're going to be incorporating into the next comprehensive plan. When we talk about revising the plan framework, what we mean is the framework that you have in your currently adopted 2035 comprehensive plan, which is a hierarchy that includes the community vision, goals, strategies, and actions. We call the vision in GSAs for short. So that's what we're going to be kind of talking about here, is an initial look at those based on what we've learned through all the public engagement and technical analysis that has been conducted, and some initial ideas about topics to be exploring in terms of policy directions that could be incorporated into the plan. So the first piece, the vision statement, there was an analysis conducted to look at the currently adopted vision statement in your 2035 plan, and to essentially highlight, you can see the different colors on the vision statement, the 5 different public input priorities that have been developed in this planning process to see if those were reflected in that vision statement. And there's that analysis revealed that there's significant overlapping consistency with what's in your current vision statement. So it's not like there's a wholesale change necessarily in what we kind of see at a vision level for the community. Next slide. That being said, so it's, the public input priorities are well represented. No other substantive topics really rise to the top in terms of the vision statement, but there might be an opportunity to kind of have a more robust connection with those 5 public input priorities. So that'll be something to look at moving forward. Next. So we also took a look at the GSAs, the goals, strategies, actions within the 2035 comprehensive plan. And you can see on the slide here, these are the different chapters in the comprehensive plan, and each of those has a specific goal. And so this was actually a previous slide we kind of touched on earlier in terms of the public engagement. What we learned through that engagement is that there's overall pretty good support, majority between 55 and 83% for all of the goals in terms of maintaining the goal statement as written. That was the feedback that we received. But there are ideas for kind of further refining those that we're going to be taking a close look at in this process. Next slide. So in looking at the GSAs, we wanted to think again about all of the cumulative inputs that we've received. So kind of starting with the 2035 plan and using that as kind of our baseline for assessment, considering the survey and round 1 and round 2 public input information. And so what I'm going to share here, if you go to the next slide, this walks through each chapter. On the left side of the slide, you will see a pie chart or donut chart, if you will, that identifies the support for maintaining the goal. So you can see on this one for the environment plan goal, 78% of respondents are in support of maintaining it. About a little less than a quarter have some ideas for changing it. And when we went and looked at the currently adopted goal strategies actions within the plan, we identified some either new ideas, new policy direction ideas, or maybe enhancing existing policies that are within the plan. And you see they're broken down here from directly coming from public input, so stuff that was generated directly by residents participating, or additional considerations that came about as part of Planning Commission working group discussions. So I'm just going to touch on the public inputs here, but feel free to ask any questions that you have about these. So for the environment goal, you can see strong support for maintaining that goal, 78%. And some of those policy ideas for consideration to be exploring as part of the drafting of the plan. So looking at reduction of development potential outside the primary services area, stronger tree canopy protection, limiting irrigation, and ending flood impacts are related to the. So on the land use, again, 70% support for maintaining the goal, a little less than a quarter for changing it. Some of those public input policy ideas for consideration include, again, reducing development potential outside the PSA to protect rural character, supporting a greater mix of uses within or adjacent to existing that primary. Someone mentioned earlier the potential reductions to the primary services area to protect natural areas and rural character, stronger protections for working lands from encroachment by new development. And you can see here it also talks about rural scale and non-residential uses and rural allowance, and possibly encouraging promoting redevelopment in targeted parts of it.
Can I ask a question? So mixed use, support a greater mix of uses within or adjacent to existing and new neighborhoods. Example of what that might be?
So I think the idea there, and the scale is going to be really important, and I think that's one thing that we want to kind of keep testing a little bit in this next round of engagement. I think that there's an opportunity to provide opportunities for kind of walking and biking to destinations from different places. And so that's one of the kind of thoughts is that, you know, right now there might be more isolated neighborhoods that aren't connected to kind of a third place, if you will, that people can go to, particularly not having to get in their car to be able to do that. So that's one of the ideas. And Vlad, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I think it also reflects survey responses that people want to be able to walk to shopping or restaurants or amenities. If there is a strip center that's outlived its marketable life and gets redeveloped, maybe gets redeveloped as a mixed-use center. So it's got restaurants, it's got professional services, it's got some elderly housing or things like that. Really a kind of whole new complete community.
Community, the public input policy ideas for consideration, limiting new development to primary character, so that kind of carried throughout. Looking at updating design guidance for rural development to reflect high importance of rural character, and potentially expand development rights, open space from rural. Economic development, the key thing that we got from the public inputs was that economic development efforts should focus on higher paying jobs and industries and kind of having a more housing. So this is one you might recall on a previous slide we talked about housing and transportation goals need kind of possibly a closer look. This did not score as strong. It got 55% of folks wanting to maintain, and a little more than a third of folks saying there's probably some need to enhance and change. And in terms of policy ideas provided by participants, and includes clarifying the targets for the local housing market. Who are we trying to make sure can live here within this community? encouraging or requiring a diversity of housing options within new developments, and then looking at land policies or funding mechanisms for non-due. Transportation again, so this one was, still a majority of folks supporting maintaining the goal, but maybe not as high as some of the other goals, and about a third interested in changing it. We look at policy ideas for consideration, greater connectivity within the primary services area to reduce travel times and congestion. There was a lot of interest in, and then focusing on new facilities, walking and biking. The common theme, there was a lot in the public comments about walking and biking. This is strongly supported. Next slide. Parks and Recreation, again, at 83%, I think this is one of the highest ones in terms of maintaining the goal. And some of the ideas for consideration include really kind of taking your existing plans and expanding or updating those to create more walkable environments, greenway networks, and waterway development as new development occurs. Extension of Capitol Trail was something that several people mentioned. Better access for parks and recreation facilities for throughout the community, particularly in the southeastern portions of the county. Talking about the importance of recreational facilities at public schools and supporting their needs, and then public access to public facilities. Again, kind of strong support for maintaining the goal, 81% there. Public input, policy ideas. Considering methods for private developments to participate in public infrastructure investments, sustainability practices for kind of county government, and including the ideas for energy efficiency of government fleets, buildings, and other types of energy efficient practices, and also high-speed internet. One more, yep, the final one, population needs, and the main public input idea that came out of this one, addressing the needs.
Thank you. So just to close it out, in your packet was a document called the Preferred Scenario Framework, 50-some page document that really talked about the land use implications of what we heard in the public input. Next slide. And Leanne shared some of these in the various 9 chapters, but these were really organized according to the 5 public input themes, and these were in the survey, the questionnaire. And we want to talk about kind of how these play out in terms of a potential land use pattern. Next slide. So this is the map of scenario B, the alternative scenario, that was presented to the public in the questionnaire, and they expressed their preference for. And I wanted to highlight some of the big takeaways or key ideas in this scenario map. Starting with number 1, limiting new residential development in rural lands through potential changes in utility or regulatory standards or public investments for land protection. Number 2, potential reductions in the PSA to maintain the rural character of some currently undeveloped areas in the PSA. Number 3, encouraging the majority of growth in this concept of complete communities by redesignating some land. For example, some existing low-density residential areas could be redesignated as mixed residential or commercial, and some existing economic opportunity areas could be redesignated as mixed commercial industrial to kind of reinforce that complete community concept, the walkable small town centers. Number 4, directing some new growth as feasible into redevelopment and infill development rather than into vacant rural areas as has been traditionally done. Number 5, encouraging the development of affordable housing by redesignating some of these low density or moderate or higher low density areas to moderate or higher density areas that may provide feasibility or conduciveness to a mixture of housing types that includes affordable housing. And finally, directing new commercial growth into mixed use areas, again, part of this complete community concept by redesignating existing commercial areas, particularly retail areas and or revising the zoning to encourage mixed use in these areas. So these are the big takeaways in the kind of land use pattern in the scenario B. Next slide. And the white paper also has a few additional planning concepts, and these are really looking at kind of current market trends and best practices in the profession. So they include designing with nature, both in terms of building design and in terms of where things are sited, making sure the design is sensitive to the natural context, enhanced rural character protection, and particularly the rural economy, economic growth through agritourism, nature-based tourism, things like that. Again, that complete community concept, which there's been national surveys that show there's increasing demand for walkable mixed-use communities. Providing housing flexibility, this missing middle that there's a demand for, everything from attached houses, townhouses, to small-scale walk-ups that, again, provide more opportunities for affordability. This new paradigm of placemaking, so creating a sense of place to attract high-wage employers based on an educated workforce that prefers those kind of places. And finally, connectivity and increasing choices for transportation, such as biking and walking, which we've seen in our citizen surveys. Next slide. So to close it out, as we've discussed, the preferred scenario framework and the refined plan framework that Leanne presented will all go into building this kind of new goals and policies framework that will be used to build a future land use map and go into implementation and the new plan in the coming weeks. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Croft to share the comments of the Planning Commission Working Group, and then back to you all.
If we could also take a moment after that to have Ms. Levering speak.
If you want, Rich, we can have her go now. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to elaborate on some of the Planning Commission Working Group's discussions on the plan framework that Ms. King presented a few minutes ago. It looks like we really don't have any argument with the framework that's carrying through from 2035, the vision, goals, strategies, and actions, vision, GSAs. So that looks pretty solid. It's how we work with the goals and then the strategies and actions to come that we're starting to really dig into now. So starting with the vision, as she said, we saw that there are many similarities and overlaps between the existing 2035 vision statement and this round's public input themes. But there are enough variations in the public input themes to warrant taking a fresh look at the language and organization of the vision statement. For example, in the nature theme, the 2035 vision statement and the 2045 public input theme both include an intent to protect sensitive features such as green space. But the public input also references water quality and sea level rise. Consequently, the working group thought it important to revise the language and organization of the vision statement using the input themes as a guide. And then when we got to the goals, started to take a preliminary look at the goals. The responses to the goals questionnaire gave us an idea of public support for maintaining the 2035 goals as written or making changes. And even though most of the respondents said the goals are fine as is, we thought they likely would be open to modifications, clarifications, or amplifications. So when appropriate, we would like to revise one or more of the goals using both the open-ended responses that you saw to the goals questionnaire and overall public input as guides. For example, as Ms. King mentioned, in the 2019 citizen survey, education was identified as important. So we want to factor that in when we start considering any revisions. And we're also keeping in mind the gap areas that you saw on an earlier slide, especially going forward with the strategies and actions in the comprehensive plan. If there's an area that the public considers to be important, but that they think that the county has not gotten where we need to go, we want to keep that in mind too. And then public input on each round 2 goal provided many policy ideas. And in our discussions, we added quite a few more. And we propose to consider all of these, especially the new concepts, when we review and revise each chapter's strategies and actions. Of course, this is a preliminary list to be augmented as we receive more input and as our working group discussions continue. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Leverance at this point?
Okay, presentation.
Yeah, great presentation. So, alrighty, I believe we are now back to the point where we're ready for any additional comments or questions or from board members as we try to sum up. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we are going to be giving some guidance here of we think they're in good shape or any recommendations we might make. So, do we have anyone else to speak before we?
It worked for the board. Perhaps we could seek your affirmation on the plan framework portion, and then Mr. Kropp could speak a little bit more to the plan framework side, and then we could do the same for.
If you want to come up and talk to that.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and thank you for the opportunity for the Planning Commission Working Group to share some of our thoughts on the preferred scenario framework document tonight. The Planning Commission Working Group spent a lot of time and effort on this for two reasons, partly because the process was new, but also because of the complexity. Some of our work efforts included guiding the concepts for the scenario modeling process, reviewing the indicator results for the two scenarios, developing the questionnaire with the public in coordination with the community participation team, and then considering the questionnaire results and the concepts discussed in the framework document. In terms of the scenario modeling process, what this means for the comprehensive plan itself, the Planning Commission Working Group reviewed the results of the preferred scenario questionnaire, which indicated that while there was a variety of responses, as you heard from the consultants, there was also significant support for the scenario B model, which represented a departure from the current trend in James City County. Planning Commission Working Group then carefully considered the contents of the preferred scenario framework document against all of the input received to date. There was overall agreement from the working group regarding exploring the framework document's information, which included the potential implications for policy development, key ideas in the preferred scenario map, and additional planning considerations to consider. The Planning Commission Working Group in particular spent a great deal of time discussing the scenario B map in comparison with the draft future land use map, which is going to be a major effort in the next phase of this process. The working group discussed the fact that while the map is not intended to be parcel specific in its placement, it's more of a high level development look, but that there are some components, some specific components on the scenario B map that are worth further exploration to see if there's some potential changes in land use designation for James City County. The Planning Commission Working Group agreed that the significant analysis and discussion, as well as additional public input, will be needed for any potential changes in the land use map or the preferred scenario framework related to the chapter text, goals, strategies, actions, and so on and so forth. Finally, the Planning Commission Working Group asked for some minor revisions based on these discussions of the consultant and the planning team, which resulted in the document and the presentation that you've seen tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have
questions for.
There also may be working group members that would like to address the board as well.
Absolutely, I'll open it up. Okay. Board members want to. Any of the planning group members? I think what we are being asked to do is to provide an affirmation that we think they're on the right track, and to give them essentially the go ahead. I found it very enlightening. I think the gap analysis, the areas where people think that this is a great thing to do, but we're not quite there yet, was very, very instructive, and I think that was very, very helpful. But I personally have great confidence in the Planning Commission and working group, and just need to take this thing to the next step, and I'm very comfortable with what they presented to us this evening.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very well put together plan. I think there's a lot of good quality information and what the citizens are looking for. I wish out of 75,000 citizens, we had more than 600 roughly. It's a shame that, you know, we're such an engaged community that we didn't get more input from, you know, I know everybody's busy with the pandemic and everything else. It's very hard to, you know, do your normal life, much less add extra things to it. So I understand that. The only thing I would caution is that we don't make it too tight. You know, can't make it just too tight, and that would be my one caution. The PSA, I would look at that as far as maybe moving that around, as far as, but not squeezing it to where we don't have any room. We can't add green space and then make the PSA smaller in the whole realm of things as well. So we've got to have a little bit of growth to keep things moving. And I'm always for protecting the rural areas, but I'm also, you know, in the rural areas as we go through this process and up here in the board, I know we're all thinking about, okay, there's certain things that we want to see the community, certain things that our districts have asked, hey, this is what we want you to do. This is why we've elected you to speak for us. And you know, with that being said, there's a lot of people that are owners of this land that we may be changing a use. So we've got to be cautious on that as well, as far as, okay, now we're redesignating this. And that's why I wish we had more participation, especially from, you know, landowners from an acre up to 100 acres, you know, and what their opinions are, what they're thinking. They may be thinking exactly, you know, we can only use what we have. We can't find anything else. I mean, we can just do the best we can do with what we've got. And I think y'all have done an outstanding job on this, trying to, you know, narrow this down and bring it into a form and a focus and a direction. And I think it's going to help us a lot in the future. I like the fact that we're looking at, you know, how do we take care of our rural lands? I was on the original rural lands committee when it started. So, you know, I really love the rural character of James City County, as most people do. But then we have some growth, and I think I could probably speak. I would think for the community, runaway growth we don't want. You know, managed growth and planned growth is what we're looking for, but to a limit. You know, how much can we take? And because each time we have growth, we on this board have to go, okay, what do we need? School, fire, police, EMS, transportation, buses, roads, infrastructure, water, sewer, you know, so all those come with that growth. And we on this board have to try to figure out with the service authority, how do we deal with, you know, adding these extra components, where if these extra components are in a tighter area and where the services already are, it doesn't strain the community as far as taxes and that sort of thing. So it's a help for the community. And, you know, the more space we have out there, the better the community is. And the more relaxed you are, the more you can go out and see something that you may not have seen last week within your own community without a very far drive. I like the fact that we're looking in this as far as how do we get to our waterways? How do we access our bike trails? You know, and how do we move those bike trails off our main roads and off our back roads and put them somewhere where our bikes are safe? Bikes are really worrying me a lot, and there's more bikes out there now than there ever been with the pandemic, but they're on the rural roads, and I ride them a lot, and I'm worried for the bikers out there. I know they're enjoying it. It's a beautiful place to ride. I don't blame them, and but with traffic and all that, it worries me we may end up having an incident. So how do we deal with that? How do we keep that segment of our population safe while they're enjoying what we have out here? And I think that's our biggest thing, is trying to figure out how do we keep everyone safe, everybody enjoying everything, being able to work, being able to develop what they need to, being able to take care of their family, and have a community that has been what it's been and continue to keep it as it is, as close as possible as we, grow up, develop. So it's a tough thing. Thank y'all. Y'all doing a wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think the type of bike that you're talking about is going to get the bikers off what you're talking out in the rural areas. Yeah, but I do especially appreciate the everything that's going on, and Mr. Haldeman is very good about sharing his vision, and he works very hard at it. I can only speak for the Berkeley district, but I appreciate that, and he's not shy about letting me know how he feels either. So I do appreciate that, and so I know he will continue to do that throughout the process. I think we're to be commended that we really want a plan that can be a working plan and not just say, yes, we've checked the box that we have a comp plan. That one that we can really refer back to and really use it to make some very important decisions as we move forward. I do worry a little bit about being all things to all people and how we're going to be able to do that. Just going back to what I said earlier about some decisions already made, we're going to really need to, as a board, as we move through this, be proactive on if there are some changes that we need to make with land use, doing that. And, going to what Supervisor Hipple said, there are some things that we're not going to be able to, there are landowners that own a piece of property and already have a plan for that. So, I was really, I was able to attend the first round of meetings, and people were so engaged, and that's so, in the age, I thought it had a pretty good variety of ages. I'm sorry the pandemic has struck, and we've sort of been held up a little bit by that. But, hopefully people will continue to stay involved, and people are not shy about sharing here, so I'm sure they will continue to do that. But I appreciate everything that everybody's doing. Thank you all. So.
And I want to begin with just tremendous appreciation for the work that's been put in by the Planning Commission Working Group and the Citizen Participation Team, and of course our consultants that are helping us get through this process. I think the work that you're doing is very useful and is actually opening up some opportunities to rethink things that maybe we have not been able to envision in the past, partly because our citizens are thinking outside the box, if you will. They're thinking about ways in which they'd like to see things. And as you go forward, I'd encourage you to make folks aware of the hard choices, because one of the things that I believe about our community is that citizens here have demonstrated in the past that they're willing to make hard choices if they think it will create a better community. We saw it in terms of their willingness to support purchase and development rights programs, and they have demonstrated an interest in addressing the problem of affordable housing very clearly. These are tough questions, tough issues to address, but I think it's been very clear that citizens recognize that there are no free lunches, that if they value something, then it means that they are willing to make an investment in it. And so let's let folks see those choices and have the opportunity to weigh in on them. And I think that'll be a very healthy process. But in terms of the basic question we were asked today, I think you're headed in the right direction. I think this is a good plan to move forward, and I look forward to additional participation as we go onto the next stage and more opportunities for the citizen at large, the Planning Commission Working Group, the Citizen Participation Team, the advice of our consultants, and the board to weigh in on these matters very fully. So thanks.
And Ms. Sadler, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, if I could, please. I, too, would like to thank everyone who's been participating in the process. And I do think we're heading in a great direction, to echo my colleagues. And I do want to echo especially Mr. Hipple, because he and I do live in the most rural part of the county, and there are some specific things that I know it might be a little different in the rest of the county. We are very diverse in what we look like and how we manage our development and that sort of thing. But just a few comments that I have heard from citizens who may not have participated in this is that they're very concerned about especially keeping this rural character, because it's very unique what we have here, so people do want to protect that. And also they're very concerned with the fact that to maybe not spread out with our building as much, they're concerned that the county might be looking more to have a little more dense building straight up rather than out. And folks up here from what I've heard, aren't very interested in that either. So I think their biggest concerns is that it's going to add more to school population, and we already have enough concerns with that right now ongoing, as we always do. So those are just a few things that I have heard from citizens up this end of the county. So maybe we're just a little more reluctant to see change because we have it wide open out here and we all love that. So we're all very conscientious about wanting to protect all of this. So just to put that out there, that those are a few comments. I'm hoping we can get more folks involved in the next round. I think you all have done a great job considering we've had such a crazy year, and 2020 will soon be over, and I know we're all looking forward to that. So hopefully this will give us an opportunity to jump off on another foot come January, and we'll be looking forward to the dates and the situation on how people can participate so we can help get the word out to our citizens. So thank you all for everything you're doing.
I believe, I hope we've gotten a pretty clear message across that I think we are telling you that we're giving you the go-ahead for the press ahead with the preferred scenario framework. I think we're very impressed with the presentation this evening and the way things are going. Please keep up the good work, and thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Rob, a couple of housekeeping items before the Planning Commission portion adjourns.
Well, yes, I apologize.
And thanks to everybody for the positive reinforcement. Very much appreciated. I think Mr. Holt wants to make a comment first before I ask for a motion to adjourn.
Just a little bit of housekeeping. I should have covered this at the beginning of the meeting, so I apologize for that. Because tonight's meeting of the Planning Commission is a public meeting with a physical quorum present rather than a virtual meeting held under the county's continuity of government ordinance, remote participation of both Ms. Leverins and Mr. O'Connor needs to be approved by a majority vote of the Planning Commission members physically present tonight. Both can be done by the same motion and vote. So Mr. Kropp, if you wouldn't mind, if you could call for said motion and then just by voice vote, we'll record that for the minutes this evening.
May I have a motion to accept the virtual participation for the two planning commissioners this evening? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you. And then may I also have a motion for the Planning Commission Working Group to adjourn to 4 p.m. on November 9th for our next meeting? Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you all. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Okay. 4 or 5 after 6. Do you want to move to the legislative, or do you want to just put it last? Okay with that? All right. We'll give folks a moment to I believe our next item on the work session is contract award and lease purchase portable radio replacement. Chief Ash.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before you this evening is a resolution to award a contract for replacement of our public safety portable radios. These are the devices that are used every day by our law enforcement officers and our firefighters to communicate back to our 911 center. And then they're also used as a backup within our emergency communications center if they had any console equipment failures. Our current equipment was purchased back in 2003, 2004 as part of the regional radio system upgrade. We've had a lot of difficulty in getting parts, and they've reached their end of life. So this contract would replace all of those for law enforcement, so both police and the sheriff's office, fire department, and emergency communications. With technology changes, a lot's changed over the last 16, 17 years. So they have a lot of enhanced audio features, and the model that we've selected for the fire department also has some enhanced features that work for hazardous environments, and they'll also integrate with our breathing apparatus, our air packs that the firefighters wear. So originally this was funded as a cash purchase. The funding has been over the last 3 fiscal year budgets, and we're headed down the road of a cash purchase. With COVID and the things that are happening now with the financial climate, we worked with Ms. Day and her staff from Financial Management Services and feel like the best route at this point was to do a lease purchase agreement. So the the resolution tonight allows county administrator to enter into that contract and also transfers the money out of the capital improvements program fund over to debt service. So we can make the initial payment, and then 4 additional payments will be included in future budgets. Happy to answer any questions.
So I guess it's pretty amazing that they lasted that kind of time, especially with technology changing the way that it did. And I'd like to know the MacGyver who kept getting all the parts and keeping them going. How long do you, any idea what your lifespan might be on the new?
I think we can reasonably expect another 12, 15 years out of those. I think it's really a testament to, one, our folks out in the field taking care of that equipment. For them, it's a lifeline of how they communicate either with other responders or back to 911 center. And it's also a testament to our maintenance program. So we're contracted, and we include in our budget every year is the maintenance agreement for the radio system as a whole, but also included in that is these portable radios. So they keep them working correctly, replacing antennas and buttons and things. And for a very long time, we've been able to replace those parts. And here recently we've reached a point where those parts they stopped manufacturing parts, and they've been very difficult to keep those in. But we've been able to swap things around and keep the field providers with equipment that's working. And so we're excited about the opportunity to upgrade these with some new technology, some new features for police.
Well, certainly. And I mean, we certainly want to make sure that there is a lifeline between our first responders and the 911 center for our citizens and for our first responders. So thank you. I'll just move the motion if there's any other questions.
Other questions? Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion. Now, Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
And Mr. Chair, Ms. Sadler indicated she had to leave our meeting, so I'll be skipping her in this one. McGlennon?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisner? Aye. Motion carries.
All right. We're going to go to the next item number 4, contract award JCC Marina improvements, and we're going to put our legislative affairs at the end. That's big. Mr. Carnifax.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before you tonight, you have a memorandum of a resolution to award a contract for Phase 1 at the Marina. Just give you a little quick, brief history. We were here last year. We put it out to bid. We only received 1 bid. This year, we did receive 3. Price did not change much. Actually went up a little bit. Even the low bidder was the same bidder as last year. Caroline Marine Structures. They're also performing work at Chickahominy now on the shoreline stabilization project. So they have performed well with us in the past. They've done a lot of work, and we did have to value engineer this thing down to get it within budget, and we had to decrease the length of some of the piers, make some modifications to the living shoreline, and we reduced some paving and some other modifications. I think I have a map that I had sent over earlier. I don't know if y'all had a chance to see it. That there were some additives in there. That was some of the piers, floating systems. They were out front. We were not able to include. So hopefully you saw that. So it's not exactly what I presented to you, originally, but it's 90% of that. And then we'll evaluate this first phase and adjust phase 2, and I think it's scheduled for 23 to try to see what we can do at that point to bring some of these amenities back in. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have right now.
I don't have any questions, just, you know, I know this has been a process, and I appreciate the work that you all have gone in to go out, because it is quite obvious if you happen to go make a trip over there, it needs some attention, and it belongs to us, and we need to upkeep it. So I just appreciate the sticking with it. So, and with that, I'll move the motion.
Other comments, questions?
Just, do you have an anticipated completion date?
Yeah, we one of the things that to get the number down to where we could afford it, we had to increase it from 180 to 220 days. So that's going to put us in late spring. You know, we're hoping to make sure the ramp and the flotation systems are in, you know, for boating season in May time frame, but it could run into June. There. Depends on how fast they get started.
Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. And then we have next is the Board Appropriation Settlement at Powhatan Creek. Small.
Members of the board, Mr. Stevens, I'm here tonight to request the board appropriate funds from an existing held surety account in the amount of $137,200 to go into an escrow account to address the remaining construction issues associated with phase 2 of the settlement of Powhatan Creek. Questions that you have, any funds that are not spent to address these issues will be returned to the financial institution once it is complete.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of work is still left on this? Is this mostly BMP type work, or?
That's part of it. The phase 2 punch list that we have been working diligently on for the past for some time includes the correction of 2 timber check dams, 2 level spreaders, 2 issues associated with stabilization, 5 to 6 sinkhole subsidence issues that we need to take care of at some drop inlets, and 1 best management practice.
Other questions?
And so this is the first action that's going to be taken. We'll take this action, and then do you have a contractor ready to work on these projects?
We've been coordinating with our capital projects folks, so Barry Moses, our capital projects engineer, is ready to roll as soon as we get the appropriation set up. The smaller things can move forward as soon as our contractor is ready to mobilize, and then we already had the plans approved for the BMP, so that should mobilize hopefully December, January.
So you anticipate finishing this early in the next year?
Anticipate being done.
Great.
Thank you for everything, and keep us updated if you would. Just
absolutely.
And with that, I'd move the motion.
Yes, we have a motion.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel? Aye. Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you. We are now ready for FY 2021 first quarter financial update. Ms. Day.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Before I launch into the county's financial update, I did want to share some good news that we received yesterday. As you're aware, the county is AAA rated by all 3 rating agencies, and as part of their due diligence, those agencies periodically perform what they call surveillance and request financial information as well as operational updates. This past week, we were contacted by Fitch, and they asked for several updates on our finances as well as some operational type questions. They were particularly interested in how the county had been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and how we've been responding. Of particular importance to them was how we ended last fiscal year and whether we had used any of our fund balance to balance last year or to balance our budget this year. I was proud to respond that we ended fiscal year 20 with a surplus, all due to expenditure savings, even with the revenue shortfall. And we balanced our fiscal year 21 budget without using any of our fund balance. Also, as you'll hear tonight, Most of what we've been experiencing so far this year was anticipated, and we built a budget of reduced spending. I'm pleased to report that we received notification yesterday that there will be not only no change to our rating, but also no change to our positive outlook, and our AAA credit rating has been upheld. This positive news speaks highly of your leadership, as well as Mr. Stevens. It reinforces that this is a team effort and that our departments played a crucial role and that they quickly responded to the pandemic by curtailing spending without drastically cutting services. It also speaks to the collaboration with our partners, and in particular, the Williamsburg-James City County School Division. This isn't to say that it hasn't been difficult or that it won't be sustainable, but it does seem to point that we are doing the right things given the current circumstances.
Thank you for all your work.
So this slide presents the county's general fund or its operating revenues on a cash basis as well as an accrual basis. You've seen this format before. The cash basis again reflects actual cash that we've received so far this year. And these figures compare more closely to the monthly reports that you receive from the treasurer. In comparing the actual cash collections this year compared to last year, overall revenues are down about $2.4 million. That's the $2,388,000 figure, or 7.8%. As you may recall, the budget reflects a 10% reduction, so we are trending a little better than budget currently. Showing revenues a different way, the figures on the accrual basis start with those cash figures and then subtracts any amounts collected July, August, and September that actually pertain to May and June of last year. The reason I present this information is because these are the figures that will ultimately be audited and that roll into the county's general fund and its general fund balance and reserves. As you can see, the difference in the accounting basis, the cash versus accrual, also yields different results. One method is based on when the money is received, that's the cash basis. The other is based on when that money, the time frame that money applies to. So from the previous discussion, on a cash basis, we are down 7.8%, but on the accrual basis, we're actually down 11.1%. When we were developing the fiscal year 21 budget with a 10% overall reduction last spring, the hypothesis at that time was that we would start to recover from the pandemic by next spring. So we assumed that we would have a harder hit the first 6 months of this year, and that's what we're seeing. We've also assumed that we'll have some slow recovery the second half of the year, which would ultimately get us to that 10% goal. This is why, of course, these updates are so important. So if that's not what we experience, either positive or negative, we have time to be proactive and we can adjust accordingly. The biggest contributors to the variances in the budget and the actual results are those other local taxes and the charges for services. We're going to take a deeper look into the other local taxes next because that's the category that's most impacted by the tourism-related revenues. The charges for services is primarily down in the medic transport fees by about $100,000 and also parks and rec fees. And those are where we collect, for example, our rec center memberships, our after-school programs, our day camp programs. That revenue loss is largely offset by expenditures in those programs in the Parks and Rec department. This graph provides trend data. So it's comparing the cash collections for July through September this year compared to that same time frame last year. And again, you can see that the other local taxes is taking the biggest hit, because this is where the sales, the lodging, and the meals taxes reside, all of which are down due to the lack of tourism in our area. When you hear us talk about our revenue loss, this is where we're seeing it. And that's the second set of bars from the left there. So then taking a deeper dive into those tourism-driven revenues and remembering the state remits the sales tax and the historic 1% sales tax to us 2 months in arrears. So again, July's collection was for May, August's collection was for June. So we really only have 1 month of collections this month or this year that's truly for fiscal year 2021. For the meals and lodging taxes, those amounts are collected locally. So what we collected in July was for June. So in there we have 2 months worth of revenue that pertains to fiscal year 21. Based on the actual cash figures, you can see in this category, again, we're getting hit pretty hard. Local sales tax is down by about 15%. The budget reflects a 38% decrease. Historic 1% sales tax is up 4%. We budgeted a 39% decrease. That is one area that seems to be very volatile. So one of the things we're noticing is we'll have 1 month where we're up double digits and the next month we're down double digits. FMS doesn't have insight into the specific businesses remitting that tax, but our assumption and our guess is that it's late payments, and that's what's happening. On lodging tax, we're down 60%. We budgeted a 49% decrease. And meals tax is down 52%, and we only budgeted for a 10% decrease. So, although still down from last year, our sales taxes are doing better than the reduced revenue budget, but the lodging and meals tax are taking much harder hits. From a dollar perspective, since the two sales tax, the main sales tax and the 1% historic sales tax, are a larger proportion of this category, the differences in all four basically offset. Net, we're down about $77,000 out of $2.4 million, just to give you some perspective on all those numbers and percentages.
Am I right that these numbers in both the cash basis and the accrual basis are roughly equivalent to the overall decline in revenue?
Yes.
But this is where it's all happening.
This is where it's happening. We haven't seen significant declines in our property taxes. Of course, we only collect that twice a year. So we'll be very interested in what the December collections look like.
Could I ask you one other question about the first slide where we have state and local funding there? Is any CARES Act money accounted for in there?
Our CARES Act funding is in a different fund. So we didn't commingle that with our general operations. We would have had very skewed results if we had presented that. Okay. So good point.
If I can go back to that same slide he was talking about, how did our decision to defer to, I think was from June to August for the payment, how did that affect the accrual? And it seems that may have had, we would have been closer to 10% or less had we not done that. Is that correct?
Yes, it was interesting. So we do what's called a 45-day accrual. So for property taxes, anything collected 45 days after June 30th, we move back to last year. This year we went out 60 days because of that extension of time. What we saw was we still collected less, which meant less was accrued back in 20, but it will help us this year because more of that revenue stayed in fiscal year 21 than what normally would. Overall, we are still down in that category, but you may remember at my last update, I mentioned there was a pretty significant refund given to one of our businesses, and that's primarily why we're down here. And that's a one-time type refund. So I did want to mention one of the reasons I don't show a budget to actual comparison this early is because the numbers don't make a lot of sense. For example, your number one collection is your property taxes. We only collect that twice a year. So if I showed you a budget to actual schedule for property taxes, we'd have maybe 5% collected because we haven't collected much this year yet. I can include it, but we would need to put some narrative to it so the numbers made sense. And so showing some trend data in those local taxes. This graph provides trend data that compares cash collections for July through September, this year to last year, in each of those local tax categories. So your local sales tax, your historic 1%, lodging, and meals. Each color in these stacked bars represent a month. So you can actually see month to month here what's happening in each category, and then you can also see the year to date information. So switching gears over to the spending side of the budget and noting that the actual numbers here reflect expenditures, but they also reflect outstanding purchase orders. And as a reminder, the majority of our budget is allocated to the school division, about 54%. The next highest category is our payroll, that's about 57%, and then the transfers that we make to our capital fund and our debt service fund. If all expenses came in evenly throughout the year, which they don't, then we would expect to see about 25% of the budget utilized so far, 3 out of 12 months. Overall, at 22.1%, you can see we're trending below budget, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specific categories next. This line graph reflects the department's spending, which is the blue line, for the first quarter of the year compared to the 25% benchmark, and that's that solid green line. For those areas that are tracking either above or below that green line, court services is above the percentage, primarily due to equipment maintenance and leases and rentals that they had to pay in full at the beginning of the year, and they also made their furniture replacements that were budgeted but purchased at the beginning of the year. Public safety is below the threshold because of their radio maintenance contract. You may have remembered Mr. Ash mentioning that radio maintenance contract as part of why we were able to extend the useful life of those radios. That payment is about $1.9 million, and it's made later in the year. So that's why they're showing a decrease right now under budget. FMS is above the percentage because, again, here we have to pay our insurance premiums, which is 98% of our overall budget, in full at the beginning of the year. In addition, the fees for our annual financial and compliance audits is also paid out within the first few months of this year for last year's audit. Information technology is above the percentage, again here because of equipment maintenance and software contracts, which require full payments at the start of the year. Community development, as you heard tonight, is wrapping up their comp plan update, and therefore their professional services percentage is tracking high, but again, it's within the budget. And I mentioned in the revenue discussion that Parks and Rec's fees were down compared to last year, and you can see here that they're also tracking under budget on the expense side, which helps with that revenue shortfall. The other category includes various things, payments to outside agencies, most of which receive their full funding at the start of the year. It includes our transfers to Colonial Community Corrections, the Capital Projects Fund, and the Special Projects/Grants Fund. Those transfers are also done at the beginning of the year. And then funding to the school division for operations and debt service is also budgeted here. Payment to the schools for operations is based on cash needs. So of course, the first few months, July, August, and September, their cash needs have been lower. Debt payments are paid out twice a year, typically in December and the May timeframe, and so we have not made those payments yet this year, which is also why it's trending below. Again, I did want to mention that due to all the uncertainty with COVID and the economic outlook, we have continued to operate this fiscal year under the same expenditure restrictions that were put into place last spring. That's it for my presentation. I'm happy to respond. Any questions you may have?
Questions?
So I had a question. It doesn't really, it's a more of a general budgetary question. I'm assuming when you sit down with the department heads, there's certain benchmarks that you're looking for or that they're giving as they're making their budget request. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so when they come back with their budget request for the next year, is there any way, is there monitoring going on throughout the year? And I'm not sure that you would be the person to do that probably. I guess that would be more of an administration piece. Is somebody checking to see if those benchmarks have been met before we do another budget before we move on to the next year's, or to say, okay, well, you did achieve that with your budget?
No, I think, Ms. Larson, where there are items that are absolutely specific that we can say they caught up and they can be benchmarked and they're a measurable item, then absolutely yes. A large part of what the departments have in their budgets, it will be salaries and personnel. So if they're filled, they're going to have those people. There are other parts that will be projects or reports, and so those are fairly easy. And then there are other parts where they have done the service. And so whether that service is something we do once a week, once a month, we certainly have categorized that. We track a lot of our data in terms of what we're doing in service to the community. Parks and Rec probably does that extremely well with their camps and keeping up with their participation in all of the programs they offer. General service a little more so in terms of visits to the convenience center and the items that we can track and see. And so where they're supposed to make progress through some of those, we do look back and we'll have those conversations as well.
Okay, thank you. And trying to think if I very much appreciate these updates that you're doing. Interesting enough, I did see where Busch Gardens pushed out a promotional piece regarding, looked like Christmastown. So I don't know if they're planning to try to do something. And then yesterday, Senator Mason made a comment on our call, which was a public meeting, that they were hoping for good news for Busch Gardens. I know we're saving Northern Neck Ginger Ale. I don't know if anyone is into saving tourism. I sure hope so. But I was wondering if, do we know if what's going on with that?
You know, I did have a conversation with Kevin Lemke in the last day or two. He did indicate that they were going to have some type of similar programming going through December timeframe. So I think it will be the same kind of limited schedule that they have had through September, October, hopefully parts of November, and then most of December. He said they thought they were making some progress on capacity. It will still not be a significant increase, but any increase he felt would be very helpful to the park, and he was hopeful to have some news of that. And so it sounds like that is working its way through based on the senator's comment. And I hope that's true for them and lets them, allows them to maybe employ a few more people and open some more of the park.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Day. And the on-deck batter. Kinsman and the 2021 legislative agenda.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, believe it or not, it's time to start thinking about our 2021 General Assembly update. I will admit to not having started this until Mr. Stevens reminded me that it was coming up because the General Assembly was still in session, and I guess my head was in April. So here we are. I thought what I would start is with what I've sent to you previously, which was a look at what happened with your legislation last year, and I know that it's not coming out great on the screen. It has my comments. I'll just go through them really quickly. The first one that you had was distribution of online sales tax by physical address, and you wanted to request that the General Assembly require online retailers to distribute tax by physical address versus zip. I understand there's some problems with 23188, 23185. Things go to the city, and we have to reconcile those accounts. That was not picked up by any legislator. The second one involved designating special conservators of the peace as in the definition of criminal justice agency. That's primarily because Parks and Rec would like our conservators of the peace, our park rangers, to be able to have access to the VSIN network so they could call in and find out who owns a particular car and the backgrounds of that. Currently, as special conservators of the peace cannot do that. If you'll recall from our meeting with the legislators, I believe Senator Norman said that that was likely to be a pretty big issue, not because of our conservators, because of others, and didn't expect that it would have any success. That was not picked up by any legislator. I recommend that one is a pretty limited effect, and we'd probably be okay dropping that one, and I'll go at it a different way. We'll see what we can figure out with that one. 1-3 was amending the code to allow localities to prohibit e-cigarette stores from locating within 1,000 feet of a public school. That was not picked up. Our fourth one was to amend the code to allow the imposition of license tax on amusement machines that take payment in forms other than coins. it's sort of an antiquated section of the code, and it talks about coin-operated machines, and those just almost don't exist anymore. It was not picked up by any legislator. It was something that came up between a discussion between the Commissioner of Revenue and myself. I will admit that's of really limited effect, and I'm okay if we don't pick that one up again this year. We've got a lot of other ones to discuss. And then finally, 1-5 was to amend the Virginia Code to require that absentee votes be reported by precinct when there are more than 25 such votes cast in that precinct. A lot has changed since we thought about this particular one. That was not carried by any legislator. No, I'm sorry, that one was carried by Delegate Batten. That was left on the table in a House subcommittee. And given the increase in absentee voting, that may have more, the General Assembly may have more appetite to consider that. I would be remiss if I didn't also pass along that is strongly not favored by your General Registrar.
And I don't understand the objection, because I believe that information is actually available in the records already, so that it would just be a matter of reporting it as opposed to having to collect it differently. I know that political parties have access to voter lists that will identify ballots. I think the person.
So before I move on to your new ones, was there any appetite for you? Do you want those three to carry back over? So that was online sales tax by physical address, e-cigarette stores from being within 1,000 feet of a school, and special reporting for absentee votes.
That's the question.
Oh, no, not the 2-3, the sales tax. I mean, I want that to.
I mean, do you want to carry those three forward? I think we can. I think we're safe in getting rid of the adding our conservators of the peace in the definition of criminal justice agency and the imposition of license tax on machines that don't take coins. But that leaves you with your three as to what you want to do with it for next year.
The question becomes, will we be successful in getting anybody to carry it? Talk to them.
Well, I guess the thing about the absentee votes, though, is if Diana's working against us, I mean, we don't need that either. So perhaps we need to have a conversation about if she works with her organization to go against what we're asking, that's not going to bode well. So,
or at least it's awkward.
Yes. Is there a conversation perhaps we can find what the issue is?
Well, so this is your, it's nice. This is different than in many of our previous years. You have at least some time for us to develop this. And so I will talk with her, and then you will, of course, you're not approving this tonight, so you're going to see this again at your next meeting, and perhaps I can bring her up and we can talk about that. It's easy enough for me to remove these from it. So all I need to know is if you guys are fine with me carrying through these three, I'll go ahead and put it on your list. You can remove it at the next meeting.
Well, you know, so our central absentee precinct is going to report roughly half of the vote in the county this time, it would appear. That doesn't really provide how people actually vote.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I'd like to try to keep it in there and see if we can get some sort of resolution, because given the fact that we're doing so much early voting, things have changed considerably. Maybe.
Well, I'll leave it on, and then I'll ask Ms. Moorman to come to your next meeting when you formally consider this, and that way we can talk with her. Okay, I thought if we're going to stay on page 1, which is your direct legislative requests, I mentioned to you guys I keep a list in my office of all the times that you request a particular piece of legislation or that something be changed, and this is nothing more than just regurgitating that list in no particular order, just other than chronologically throughout the year. So the first one that was asked for by Mr. Hipple back in March of 2020 was to add a provision to allow for an increased litter tax. A particular section of the Virginia Code imposes an annual litter tax of $20 on certain manufacturers, and then increases an additional $30 per location of grocery stores, soft drink and carbonated water, and beer and other malt beverage retailers. This came out of a meeting in which Ms. Borman was talking about Clean County Commission, and we had a lot of trash on the roads. You'll see another one of these in just a minute. All of that money that's collected goes to the Commonwealth's Litter Control and Recycling Fund, and of that, 95% is expended on local litter prevention and recycling grants to localities. So It is collected as a tax collected by the Commonwealth, but 95% of it is delivered back to localities. And so that was Mr. Hippel's request in March. I'd like to include that. I will certainly work that up and put it in ours.
So what we really would want to do there is ask that the state raise the tax.
That's correct. Any sort of making one up, any particular number, double it, from 20 to 40?
Trash out on the ground, I expect you to pay.
I'll come up with a number.
But no, the tax is applied to the retailer. Is that right?
That's correct. It's on manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors, or retailers of certain
not the items. Actually, necessarily the person who's littering. It's the vendor of the product.
It's the vendor of the product, and then it comes back to your litter fund to hopefully help clean up the counties. So you're trying to. It's taxation at the source of the trash, not the person who actually distributes it on the road. If we're still in agreement with that, then I'll include some form of that on your next one. The second one at the same meeting, Mr. Hippel talked about adding a provision to allow localities to require sprinkler systems in residential houses. This one, we're not the first to think about that, and I've done some research on this one. Construction standards are contained in the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code, as you know, Mr. Hippel, which is 3 parts: the existing building code, the maintenance code, and the construction code. They're managed by Department of Housing and Community Development at the Commonwealth, and really that's where your housing standards all come from. So just trying to think of where you would put something like that. Really, it belongs in one of those particular codes, and those are generally managed by the DHCD governing board. There was some press last year about Loudoun County and Fairfax County trying to get that changed, and the DHCD board denied that change. I talked to my counterpart over in Fairfax, also talked with my counterpart over in Loudoun, and they share a common set of fire folks. I think one fire person moved from one locality to the other, and I forget who went where, but he serves on a board that has some oversight of that. I think it was the state, gosh, I forgot, I have so many monikers stuck in my head. Anyway, long story short, they believe that they will be successful this year in getting the DHCD to change that code to allow residential sprinklers in certain attached residential units. And they're pretty optimistic about that. It's currently in there for 4-story, not that we have any here, but for 4-story residential units. So that's what they're hoping. I know that that's not getting to where you were looking for individual detached residential, but I wanted to give you a background of what's going on elsewhere in the state with that particular provision.
And this also talked with the TPO and PDC, because they brought some of these issues in front of us, and they were talking about sea level rise and that sort of thing. And I said, we're attacking this situation in the wrong direction. I said, we're trying to make a law that's across the state of Virginia. I said, what happens in Norfolk with flooding doesn't normally happen in Roanoke. It's awful hard to get up that mountain. So I said, what we need to do is allow jurisdictions to be able to enact something in their jurisdiction that affects their jurisdiction, because they're going to get more flooding in Norfolk than they are in James City County. So the bar may be different set. You can't do it across the state of Virginia. If the state of Virginia was flat, that might work, but it's not. And I said, y'all are attacking this in the wrong direction. We need to have more control in our counties and cities as what affects us than the state dictating this is what we're doing as a blanket across. Of course, there'll always be a rules and regulations that the state has for everybody has to do this. But each locality ought to be given a little bit of leeway in order to have something different for their locality. It may be James City County would put in effect that we have sprinkler systems in our single residential houses. It may be in Norfolk that flooding is an issue and freeboard is not at 7 foot, it's at 9 foot, and we want you to be 2 foot above that, so you're going to build at 11 foot. And so that's what, as I talked to the PEC and TPO and Bob and all that, I told them, I said, we're missing the boat of allowing the localities some more room to address the needs of that locality, because one brush doesn't paint it all. So that's where we're missing it in.
And if it's the will of the board, I mean, I will find a place in 15.2, which is where you find all of your powers, to allow localities, and I can write it up that way, to allow localities to make that choice. I'll admit it would be a unique section of the code in terms of directing construction outside of the Uniform Statewide Building Code, but certainly one we can try, and I'm happy to draft it up.
Because it's like our hunting regulations. There's certain hunting regulations across the state of Virginia, but in James City County, you can't put a loaded hunting rifle in your vehicle and drive down the road. There's several things in each locality that they say, we will not allow. In James City County, you have to be elevated at a 10-foot level to shoot a rifle. Over in Charles City, you can't shoot a rifle. So each locality was able to make their own rules. Why can't we do it with building? Why can't we say the state rule is this, and then we add these or take away these within our community?
Based upon my discussions up at the General Assembly previously, I'll just tell you the Home Builders Association of Virginia, they are actively seeking to make all of the rules exactly the same so that a builder can move from one locality to the other and have exactly the same thing. So that's always the hill that we have to climb as local governments when we want to have some unique power, particularly with residential home building.
I was going to say the building industry has a stronger lobbying presence in Richmond than the deer industry.
They do.
Action. I mean, I'll draft it up and put it on there, and then you guys can make that decision next meeting. Third one was to add stiffer penalties for a violation of a particular section of the Virginia Code that mandates motor vehicles cover loose loads while on the highway. That was from Ms. Larson. I think that really came out of that same meeting about trash on the side of the roads. Currently, the penalty for that is a Class 4 misdemeanor, which is a fine of not more than $250. So if that's what you guys want to keep it on there, it's easy enough for me to move that up. Just by reference, a Class 3 gets you to $500, a Class 2 gets you to $1,000 and includes possibility of jail, and a Class 1 gets you to $2,500.
Well, I do feel it's litter, and I feel it's safety as well. So.
Was there any particular number in there that you found more magical than the next?
I'm okay with 500.
Okay.
Because I'm sure this is going to sail right through. I have every confidence.
The next one is more difficult, and that was Ms. Larson's as well. That was allowed for increased residential assessments for Airbnb properties. I spoke at length with our real estate assessor, Mr. Fountain, today. I'm certain that despite his able coaching, I will mess this up, but I'm going to try my very best. Currently, assessments, let me put it briefly, you could do that now. Currently, assessments are based on the highest and best use theory, and in most cases, that highest and best use in this sort of scenario would be the residential home. You could switch over and go to a commercial-based taxing system, and you'd look at it from an income base. The problem with doing that is unless someone made an incredible amount of money on the Airbnb, you would actually lose tax money because what you would be is taxing on the net income, not the gross. And so we ran some numbers and just played with a lot. You'd have to rent that thing out almost every day for an incredible amount for the net taxable income from your Airbnb to be more than what we would charge you for your residential house.
So you're saying you can't.
If I taxed it,
you can't double it.
That's
you
correct.
Can't double dip it.
That's
you
correct.
can't say you live in. Well, we don't even know, but you're renting it out as a commercial. It's a commercial enterprise. There's no two ways about it.
And if we did it commercial on an income base, you would, in some cases, you might make some more money. In some cases, you would lose some money.
But if you're doing it legally, you're paying anyhow.
So if you're doing it legally, then yes, there's a number of other taxes that you're going to pay for that we charge you for as well, as long as you're doing it legally.
That's the key here.
Well, except that if your home has an SUP on it that allows for short-term rental, that should increase the market value of the home, doesn't it?
Because hotels are paying those taxes as well, but they're also paying commercial
then the commercial is based upon your income basis.
Right.
And so the real estate assessor is certainly aware of any SUP and an additional ability to use the house. I don't know that it really, that there's a material factor in there.
But I think that is that a way to avoid the problem here by basically just saying that, you know, the existence of an SUP does, I mean, I guess if you looked at the question of whether they transfer at higher rates than surrounding properties of equal
it may incrementally
dimensions.
change it. I don't know that there would be like I've read Ms. Larson's request to be more of a specific, you know, you will pay extra because you have this. That's a much more incremental change. I didn't want to leave you completely empty-handed. There is a possibility. So one of the sections of Virginia Code allows a locality to operate a registry for Airbnbs. We don't do that here. You certainly have that ability, and what that says is everybody that has one, a legal operating Airbnb would have to put their name and the houses on a registry that's operated by the county, and if someone didn't have it, operated an Airbnb that wasn't on the registry, then there's a $500 fee. Within that section, because you have a $500 fee for not being on there, I thought if you wanted to, that would be a place to put in maybe $1,000 a year to $1,000 a year fee to be on the registry that helps the county maintain it, do inspections, that sort of thing. I mean, if I was looking for a place to tuck a fee for Airbnbs in the Virginia Code, that's the section. And if that's what you'd want, I can do that. It would certainly mean that the county would have to, you'd have to operate a registry, which we don't do it now.
Which would take people power.
I don't know that we have that many in the county. It's not like a Virginia Beach.
Not sure how much we have, but there are companies that will actually perform this service of identifying places that are offered for rental within your locality. Yes.
But and I'm just in the middle of this process. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. Give me $1,000.
Thank you. Here you go. Here's a glass full. So I haven't finished. Mine's not operating yet. So I'm still in setting it up and everything else. But as I set it up, of course, then I've got to go over and set it up with the county as well. That's my next part is getting the business up and going and getting that established as a legal business. This is a actual legal business. And then I go get my business license and pay my taxes and everything else with the county. And so I don't know what that fee, and I'm sure there's a fee for it, I would imagine.
I'm sure there is.
But you know what that fee is on that portion. But then I'm legally set up as an actual operating Airbnb within the county. So you will know that that's what that is. I think the biggest thing is what's getting a lot of it is the ones we don't know.
Yeah.
That are operating that, you know, mine's going to be up and above board. You're going to know what it is, what's made. The county's going to know it. You know, Dick's going to know it over there, how much I pay and what it costs and how much I'm renting it and all that. But I think it's the ones we don't know that are slipping through the cracks.
Yeah.
Well, that's when you can address if we had a registry and you found somebody that didn't, then there's a $500 fee. But we can go after them in court. It's just it ends up being a difficult proof proposition.
Do we have the ability right now to have somebody or the internet and find out the ones that are operating that are not operating legally that we could then
have the ability? I don't think we have the manpower.
Well, and I think what you know, I actually sat and watched an hour-long webinar on this thing. What they will tell you is that in many localities, people who are operating short-term rental facilities will pull them down at 8 o'clock in the morning and put them back up again at 6 o'clock at night, so that during normal working hours, staff in county offices would not catch them. And so they do 24-hour searches of all short-term rental sites and produce lists based on that.
Interesting.
We don't need to be doing it ourselves. We could contract it out. Somebody that works around the clock.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how much. So let me give that one some thought and then talk to Mr. Stevens to see if there's any appetite to maybe see if we can dig a little deeper that way. Thank you.
This legal ones alone.
We'll see. I'll have my people get with your people. Yeah.
Number 5 is probably the last one that's going to require a little bit of discussion. I think the rest are a little bit easier. Ms. Larson asked again in March to allow for increased assessments for residences that are unfinished for an extended period of time. Again, in my discussions with Mr. Fountain, of course, assessments are required to be fair and equitable. He did say that all unfinished houses are considered the same. They're assessed based upon the stage of the last approved construction, regardless of how long that stage has been. And adding a penalty for that extra time would be really difficult in keeping everything fair and equitable. He is going to go back and double check all houses that we know that have been unfinished for a certain amount of time and take a look and make sure that we're matching that up. But
I'm curious, does he consider what that's doing to the property next door? In their fair and equitable, if you're next door to a house that hasn't been finished for 27 years, I find it a little hard to believe that it's not impacting your property value.
I'll ask him again. It's probably of that incremental bit that we talked before. I'm sure it's negligible.
But if you can't sell your house, which has happened from somebody that's been across the street for a house that hadn't finished in 27 years. So, okay.
I will say that though, I think that there, as we've talked about, I think that there are provisions in the Uniform Statewide Building Code that allow us to address that, and we're doing that now. We filed a case, and we're going to test that law and see how that works out for us. So
okay.
So some localities put in place that you have X amount to finish, and then at that point, if you're finished, you get a final CO. If not, you can get a temporary CO, move in, and finish the work. But if you get a temporary CO, you're paying, I know one locality, they charged us $150 every 3 months. And you had X amount of time to then have that completed, but you just didn't get in there for free. You had to pay this and you had to put a credit card in before you could move in, so they could tack that credit card every 3 months. And so that would be some way that, there's got to be a state law for that, because other localities do it. And they'll say, yeah, you can move in, but you're going to pay X amount either month or every 3 months.
it's probably a fee to renew the temporary CO. So you get a temporary CO for 3 months, and it's $150 to renew it. And that's certainly something we can look at.
And you could probably put it what you wanted, and that might spur somebody who's stuck in not going to finish at least year. And then, if they don't finish, then that goes to an amount of money that.
Number 6, this one is one that we've run into at least a few times, and this also came from the month of March. So we had a lot of thoughts in March.
That was before the pandemic struck.
This was from Mr. Eisenhower, and it was to amend the Virginia Code to explicitly give boards of supervisors the ability to impose sunset clauses on use permits. I don't feel like I need to over-explain this one. The Virginia Code is very explicit, and it lets BZAs do this. It does not say that for BOS. So in my legal opinion, you do not have that power. I will tell you that's not a legal opinion shared by all of my colleagues. We probably run 50-50. If that's something that you want to change, we can settle that debate once and for all.
I'd like to try to see it.
Number 7 was to change the state code to allow the Commissioner of the Revenue to release the names of all the businesses in the county. That came from Ms. Sadler in August. I think that was an outgrowth of the 30-day fund, where we were having a difficult time getting all the names of businesses. 58.1-3 is govern secrecy of information. It really holds the Commissioner of Revenue to a pretty high standard. There are a number of exclusions in there, and this is not one of them. So I certainly don't blame him for not doing that, but if you would like, we can seek to add an exclusion from the exception.
In that instance, would it have been possible for us to ask the commissioner if he would communicate to those businesses the information that we wanted to get across? Our expense.
Perhaps. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. That way he wouldn't have to change the law. You just have to ask him to do it.
I can ask Mr. Bradshaw if that's something that he would do, and then if he says no, then maybe we come back with this particular change next month.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 8, 8, 9, 8, 9, and 10, all the last 3 are probably page 2 positions rather than direct legislation. So 8 was to ask the General Assembly for additional 911 funding or for additional money to offset the cost of Next Gen 911, and that came from your September meeting. Ms. Larson also asked at the second September meeting to ask the General Assembly for additional money for general registrars.
Can I stop you there for
You
just
may.
1 second? For that office, absolutely. They are passing more and more laws for voting, which, but they're not, it's an unfunded mandate. And they're pushing stuff through without any regard for, or if there is, it doesn't appear that way. And, I'd like, when's the last time they looked at, because they set her salary, I mean, we need some relief in that area. So
That's a salary set by the comp board.
right. So I think it's not only, it's administrative cost and also her cost.
Yeah, and there's no doubt in my mind that citizens are really appreciative of these changes.
Oh my God.
They really think that this is a tremendous new development, which means they're going to use it a lot.
Yeah, because I went by there today. I was so surprised at how big. There was a line to get in, and I mean that place was buzzing. They've heard nothing but positive comments. They told me. Back to Supervisor McGlynn, almost half of our registered voters have already voted. So it's just going to continue. I don't think that's all pandemic related. So yeah, they can't keep pushing this on us without some financial relief.
Well, at some point, you're going to be looking at, she already has some physical space issues out there, and we're going to be looking at putting in something a little bit bigger than that. So that's,
yeah,
I can include all of that in there.
I think there's some after action reports from what's going on this year that we need to sit down and work out. And I agree. It's going to take more money. We may have to put some in, but by God, the state ought to put some in.
Yeah, yeah.
The last one, number 10, came from Ms. Moorman a few days ago. Asked that the board take a position that the General Assembly should not approve the proposed change to extend polling place hours on Election Day. Chapter 720 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly changed a particular section of the code to extend the hours that polls must be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. to instead 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And they approved that in 2021, but it had 2020, but it had a clause that said it doesn't take effect unless the 2021 General Assembly also approves it. Ms. Moorman's point to that was a vast majority of our poll workers are senior citizens. They're already in there for 15 to 16 hours, and one extra hour may cause a good bit of attrition. She's like, it's already a really long day, and 1 extra hour is longer than I want.
Because once you're in, right, if you're a poll worker. The other piece of it is, and something I think we're going to have to address, is it's dark. At our elementary schools, which are not designed with a lot of lighting because we don't have a lot of nighttime events, it is extremely dark even after 6. High schools, I think, do a little better job, but we're going to have to address, I think, some lighting at our, just going until 7. So, I like the idea of an extended day because it is very difficult. But then I think if you're opening early voting opportunities on one end, you've answered that call. So, but you can't. I think a 6 a.m. Well, they have to get there at what? Probably 5. 5 to 9, or if there's a dispute, they could be there.
Once it closes, they stick there for about 2 more hours.
Yeah.
Long day. I think, I think the one thing that does not sit really well with me about the early voting sites is that the hours are 8 to 5, and there should be some opportunity for some kind of evening hours for people who that would not really work.
There is Saturday.
There is Saturday, but some people work Saturday too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. That's a good point, John, because my daughter, as a school teacher, was not able to early vote during the week, but she did on Saturday. An evening would be nice even if they only did it like on Wednesday evening, evening hours on Wednesday evening. remembering that if you did that for early voting, it's only one location. And so it's not, if you're trying to extend the hours for over 19 precincts, it's
Yeah.
a lot of people.
No.
So it's a lot easier to do if you had some sort of an evening hour, maybe worked into the early voting process.
That's the general.
Yeah, that's above our pay grade. Move on.
All right, well, I'll leave those three in. Unless you want me to, I won't go through all of your 2020 page 2 items. They all still exist. Nothing changed. Really, I probably need to reword a little bit of the Eastern State Hospital surplus property, which I'll do, but the rest of the issues still remain. And unless you guys have changed your mind, I'll just go ahead and carry them over and add the 8, 9, and 10 from this one. So the process is, what I will do now is put all this a little bit more formal in your proposed 2021 materials. I'll email that to you well before the meeting so that you'll have it. It'll be on your considerations at your next meeting, and then you can approve it. Once you approve it, then at your work session meeting in November, we'll bring the legislators in and see who you can convince to carry what.
I think one of the things we need to do is that at our next meeting, when we approve it, is to give you the workload up as to who wants to twist an arm of an appropriate legislator to try to carry something, because it's going to be very frustrating if we have all this stuff and get nothing carried. So,
Well, I assume hopefully they'll come like they have in the past, but I know getting them to.
I also understand that their deadline for pre-filing has been moved back from early December to like the 30th of November.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's
Okay.
important that we
Yes.
get out in front of it
Absolutely.
before our work session, because you're only going to have a very narrow time period in which they'll have the opportunity to file something.
Yes.
I do provide them with a copy at about the same time I provide you with a copy, so they'll
On
have it.
page 2, are we going to, I know we say about the education piece, but that ADM piece, I think, is something that we need to be concerned with, because I believe Dr. Heron told us they were down by 5%. And we just have no way of knowing if schools are going to be back prior to that March 30 day. And, you know, I think, yes, we might lose students that have chosen a different path. They may not come back to, but I have a feeling the large majority will come back to WJCC once they are back and open full time. And so I do think we do need to be lockstep with the school board or VACO and the Virginia School Boards Association on where they are with this ADM. So we can talk to our legislators about that as well. I think Senator Mason is tuned in, but not sure the others are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That should wrap it up. We are now down to board requests and directives.
Let me just take a moment to mention the passing of one of my constituents. Roy Hawk passed away of COVID on October 25th. Roy is a resident of Kingsmill, and he's also a very successful entrepreneur, a dedicated philanthropist, and had devoted a lot of his resources and support to the Jamestown rediscovery. And I wanted to extend my condolences to Margaret Nelson Fowler, his partner, and his family, his children, over his passing.
Just the day after our last meeting, Mr. Stevens and I, along with our Economic Development Department, attended the groundbreaking for the Main, which is a event venue that will be out across from Governor's Land. And they hope to open next year. And beautiful piece of property. They spoke very highly of economic development and all the help that they were able to give them to get this piece of property done and work on it from a tourism standpoint and from an event venue. So very appreciative of that and very excited about that addition. Very often, you know, there's a place up in, I guess, Charles City the Burlington, you probably all passed it on Route 5 if you've gone to Richmond. And to give you some idea, that that event venue is booked every weekend this year. And especially it was pre-COVID, but now it's an outdoor. It's an opportunity to have an outdoor venue. So I think the Maine will do quite well. So I'm glad to welcome them to the county and to the Berkeley district. We had a jail meeting. The Virginia Peninsula Jail has, I think, and I believe it's the jail board's opinion, all in all, they have handled the COVID very well. There have been cases, but they've really held any major outbreaks. They've tried to address it immediately. I know that Mr. Stevens did inform us that there was unfortunately, someone who had been intook that had passed away, but believed that was pre-existing medical condition. But the staff there and the superintendent are doing a very good job. A reminder that I have my finance meetings with the Tourism Council that are open, and if any of you wish to attend, please let me know. I think I mentioned it last time, but Supervisor Wassmer from York County has resigned, and so there will be a new chair appointed. Next tourism. I thought that the joint meeting that we held on Monday, 8 a.m., went very well, was very interesting. And I think WY has put that out along with all the slides, but it's also on I would assume it's on our website because it was recorded, right? Yes. So I also think that while there is, there's always going to be work to be done, and we certainly don't know we're in such time of uncertainty right now with COVID and its impact on education. This county and its citizens are to be commended for its contribution to education. I thought it was particularly interesting that there are 46 localities that go above and beyond the 100% mark, and that's us. We're at 115%. So I think that we're going to have to work together, especially always. But as we move through this next budget, as we heard tonight, what our revenue outlook is like. And so I do appreciate the relationship that you have with Dr. Heron, Mr. Stevens, and I know Mr. Trivet as well. But I think it's going to take all three localities working together as we move forward. So thanks very much.
Few things. Into the HR tech, or not HR tech, but TPO, PDC, there's so many acronyms now, it's hard to keep them all straight. And finance and budget meeting as well. We also put out on HR TAC, which is the other group, we put out a bond letting of $600 million just recently. So that went out, and we're great on that. We're secure, so that secures definitely into another portion of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. So that project is moving along smooth and clicking right along. It's amazing when you have things that are, anywhere from 27 to 100 million, you're transferring money back and forth. It's crazy the amount of money it takes to do transportation. It's just amazing. It amazes me. Our next bond letting will be next year, which will be around 1.3 billion. So that's a big, huge number. And it's amazing to watch all of it and how they sell and what they do in the process. And it took about, with COVID, normally we go up and sit and go through the whole process, and we're there all day. But with COVID, it was actually 6, almost 7 meetings in one as you're trying to figure out and close this one down, start this one. Now we got to go into closed session. Now we come back out of closed session, we go this. So it's a lot of work on that side of the fence, but it's fun work, and we're getting transportation moving as smooth as possible. And that's all I've got to cover today.
I had basically one virtual agenda meeting, or a virtual meeting with the mayors and chairs. We were the host. It worked out quite well. One of the things I'm going to ask Mr. Stevens to address a little bit here is we are always looking for things that we can be working on as an area, as a group, you know, as opposed to just hearing what each individual jurisdiction is up to. And that one of those is the extension, I think, what they call the boat trail. So I think I'll let him talk about that because that was fairly well received by the group. I will tell you that at the end of the meeting, I did tell them that we really appreciated their participation, and I hope they enjoyed the virtual lunch we provided. So. The other thing is, I sent you all an email. I just wanted to remind you. I had gotten it. It's from the Hampton Roads Utility and Heavy Contractors Association. I think you might remember that. They've got another HROMFA type acronym. But the board was invited to their social event out at the 4-H. This, I believe, is this Thursday evening. I'm going to be out of town, so if you all want to attend and have misplaced the email, let me know, and I'll send it. Extended the invitation to the board members, and I wanted to make sure you knew that. And that's basically what I want. For the reports of the county administrator.
Mr. Chair, no reports. I will follow up on the boat trail, or the birthplace of America. For those that may not remember, it is a study that was done. Our PDC, I think, led that, but it's another sort of tentative routing of bicycle or off-street bicycle pedestrian paths to connect to the Capitol Trail and carry it down to Fort Monroe and Hampton. So there, as we talk to the localities, both as CEOs and then as the mayors and chairs group, there are a lot of little pieces in between that are already sort of occurring. Newport News has a section that they're trying to incorporate in one of their projects. We have some here locally. Williamsburg is building a small piece. York County has a strong interest in connecting. Hampton has a project they're getting ready to, they just received some local transportation funding to move a small section forward. And so this group before, I think, had a big impact on Interstate 64 widening. And so it was thought working together and keeping that as a project in front of this group that we can help support and push for funding to help build segments of that, I guess another 45 miles to connect it from here to Hampton. So I think you'll hear more of that. Yes, sir. We're focusing here to Hampton, but you're absolutely right. There is connection to South Side and trying to get it up
and looking
on
to
over there as well.
Surrey and
Yes, sir.
a lot of boats, a lot of bicycle trails.
Well, if that's it. We've been 3 hours and 15 minutes at this. So I will look for a motion to adjourn until 5 p.m. on November 10th for a regular meeting.
Motion.
We have a motion. Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Ms. Larson? Aye. Mr. Hippel? Aye. Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We are adjourned.